I just want to applaud, Ashely, you making this so stark and clear for everyone. I think it is the kind of dilemma that we face and we have in all our constituencies. You know, my situation is the opposite of Ken's. You know, we need to drive down demand wherever possible because if it goes up, we have to build a desal plant or something extremely controversial and expensive. And finding a climate broker or a climate information broker that can help is what all of us do when we get down to the assessment task. And that broker has got to be able to tell us things that we don't want to hear. And tell others things that they don't want to hear for very different reasons. So I don't really have a question. I just have, I just think that what you just went through and your plea for, I think, impartial as much as possible. And I know the modelers are going to freak out about you saying you want to just see the right set of models in there, but I do think that demand is absolutely out there, and that's what we're here to talk about and what lots of people have been talking about for a long time.
As I was as I was listening to Ashely, you know, what dawned on me is that you really present 4 different models of practice because of the environments you practice in, coming from a pretty similar basis of urban planning and modeling analysis. So I started thinking about you as doctors, and tried to imagine what it would be like to think of you as practicing something like medicine for resilience. And Jessica, to start with you, you are practicing tertiary care. You're in a place where you can downscale IPCC projections, and that's like personalized medicine. We're gonna take these global models and then we're gonna tell New York City what likely scenarios are to deal with, and that is a particular set of problems to have, but the rest of us I think are looking at, wow, look at all the stuff that they've got at their command in New York, thanks to Mayor Bloomberg, I think, and the way that things came together there. And Ashely, you're a country doc saying, hey, I got all these pills that I can prescribe, but I don't know which one is how they're gonna work together. And the information I get is a bunch of medical journals. That's not helpful. I've got to go out and, you know, set a leg and deliver a baby, and, you know, maybe deliver and maybe help do some veterinary medicine on the side. You know, I mean, I think that's the situation that you're in, which again, medical school prepares you for that really as little as Jessica is prepared for the complex, you know, the multiple complex technical tasks that her institution is practicing. And Kristin, you struck me as talking about the plight of the missionary doctor, that you have a world that's being changed dramatically from the outside, the way that globalization sweeps through developing countries. And you're frantically trying to do what you can, and for you, the costs imposed by climate change are not a matter of theory; they are problems of equity, and because the change that's being forced. Someone said it's always the poor people who get flooded, and you are that's your population that you're trying to heal and to care for, and that's why for you equity is the important question, and you made an important question for me, because if climate change does force changes, the distribution of the costs of those changes is of paramount importance going forward. And that's something that I think that the climate science community has done very little about or with, partly because it's analytically very difficult, and, you know, we talked about the difficulties of analyzing demand. So, and Ken, you strike me as practicing a kind of public health medicine, that what you care about is not only the individual populations, but also the communities, you know, the way these communities are networked together, because that's your mandate at the Central Arizona Project. And so you have to worry about making sure that the models that are used in Tucson and in Phoenix, along the frontier of growth in Phoenix, are commensurate with each other in the way that they analyze a resource that they're all tapping into and that needs to be managed. Now, the point of all this metaphor is to try to highlight what I thought your distinctive practices were leading you toward, and the problem of the climate model broker that Dave just brought up is the problem of health insurance, basically. We need some authority that's out there that is prepared to channel the resources, analytical resources in this case, not the financial ones, to channel the analytical resources in such a way that they benefit, there's appropriate care delivered to each patient, but overall costs are contained in some way or another. The interactions are straightened out. And what I'd have to say is that the conflict that Ashely highlighted for us is not going to go away. If you give it to some authority to say, okay, we're going to rate the models and show you what the interactions and risks are, that doesn't remove the problem. It just gives it a face and a name. This is the organization that's going to tell the city of Aspen or the city of Tucson what the right way to handle this is. And that's going to be very contentious. Okay, so finally. So last, I think that each of you is working in very complex networks where you're each exerting leadership. And the question I'd like I don't want you to necessarily respond to this, is what does it take to be a leader in that situation?
That was a really nice metaphor.
If I tried to make a connection to it, I would say you need a social worker. So the thing that you just brought up, Ashely, I think is a brilliant example of the kind of problem that we all face. That we are asking for, please give me the solution, when climate change doesn't have one solution, and no scientist in the world could tell you that, and if they do, you should run for the hills. I mean, really fast, because they're going to sell you snake oil. No one has that answer, and no one will give you that answer. We need a whole different way of approaching it. And so the social worker metaphor is that we have actually tools in the toolbox, typically not in the toolbox of a physical climate modeler, but they exist actually. They're called scenario planning, they're called robust decision-making planning. There are tools that help you to make adequate decision under these circumstances. You need different people to give you the answer. I rest my case.
And I'll just follow up because I completely agree with that. A lot of what this comes down to is thinking that there's a single question and a single answer. There's a model you should use. In reality, if the question that's being asked is not incredibly well refined, the answer is going to be the wrong answer, even in the context of understanding that it's a panoply of answers. And the reason I say that is, if you want to look at community resilience broadly, that's a really different question than if you want to look, for example, at minimizing flood risk, or in the case of me doing a parallel basin study to what Ken described, I'm trying to get this community to focus explicitly on managing the risks associated with climate change. So I'm trying to push them towards looking at the higher end of demand and the lower end of supply, because they've been heading right down the middle forever, and it's the extremes that are going to eat their lunch. But that's a specific framing, and there needs to be specific framing and specific questions to get to reasonably appropriate sets of answers.
I think that one thing I was trying to just accentuate, since this is the city panel, is how that plays out. So I think that in any given city, there are folks doing this work in 10 different places. And what we're seeing now is it's all colliding. Whereas before it was just one water utility doing something. And now in the region, or in whatever region you're dealing with, it's all coming up. And I think that we're losing the public trust really, really quickly. And that's what I fear, is not that I don't have the answer, but that suddenly it's all bubbling up and the public's asking a lot of questions that I wasn't able to answer last night. And why is all this different, and why are we hearing something different from Vail? And I think that that's what those of us in cities are really up against. And I wonder how the science community can really help us prepare for those struggles. I don't know if you're seeing that as well. I need to not use the microphone anymore.
Look, like Kaya, I thought the whole panel was fantastic and they covered lots of really interesting things. Just focusing on the points that Ashely raised and that Susie just commented on, is that sort of issue about sort of shopping around for the GCM model results and downscale models that you want is endemic. Bruce Hewitson, for example, in the Climate Services Program actually wrote a paper on the ethics of that and the misuse of GCMs in that sense a couple of years ago. And that's what I'm actually going to be talking about tonight as well, is that in essence what you're actually seeing there playing out is a misuse of a research activity, which is the GCM, for an operational decision making, which is what you're trying to do, and it's pretending that that research activity is actually suitable for that purpose, and it's not. And so there is actually an ethical dimension to this, and that's what I'll be talking about tonight. And so one of the ways around this is the sort of things that Susie talked about, is that there are a whole range of other ways of going around to get the information that you need to actually make those decisions. And in fact, a little while ago I actually wrote a paper which actually deconstructed all of those arguments as to why you should use sort of quantitative, modelling results for the purposes of operational decision making. And effectively, there's a whole range of things, about 7 or 8 reasons why you wouldn't go down that pathway in an unadvised manner. And so I think there are ways of navigating this space, but it actually is very, very different from the standard model of climate science is the core information piece that you need. Let's go out and get that climate model and downscale it so it's actually personalised for your region or your location. That's actually a really flawed argument.
Can I just make a quick comment? So we're talking about all these different types of decision-making, operational decision-making, and I think this is the challenge that we're kind of posing back, is there are these different ways to look at this, right? There's scenario-based, there's operations-based, and we have all these different stakeholders that we're working with. And when you're working with water and wastewater treatment, we are looking a lot at operational, and when we're looking at community, it's completely different, and we're using a lot of scenario, and we're using social science. And so that's the piece that we really need the help with, is how to take this information, this great information and data, and how do we filter it into these different ways of communicating with all the different stakeholders in a way that makes sense to them, in a way that makes sense to incorporating it into our plans, and in a way that we can work together, all of us. That's the challenge, I think, that we're kind of faced as well. I'm sorry? The social, yeah, no, I think, Susie, you hit it on the head every time.
A comment and then a question. The comment is as we've been struggling, as I struggle with a food, energy, water nexus in urban areas in particular, bringing in urban agriculture as part of the way to address some of these issues. There's a water energy aspect to it, and especially if you look at the vertical farming, getting fresh fruits and vegetables to the public. It's a health matter. So there's a lot of connectivity that is emerging, and I don't think we always keep it in mind when we're talking about, when this rubric of climate change, there's actually other things happening in urban settings. So just to put it in our psyche. My question actually is and I've been ruminating, Kristin, on the point you made about sustained engagement, and I wonder if the way to have sustained engagement with communities is through the monitoring piece. And it gets back to citizen science that we talked about yesterday. Is that a way that we could really harness the resources that we have in urban areas and really get people connected to the system they're in a real time, as well as take advantage of the information they're providing so that it helps inform our own decision making? And I think Baltimore's really done some fantastic things, I think, in engaging the community. So I'd be really interested to see if that's a practical way to go.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's definitely a way to keep sustained engagement. And I know that for us, we started with an urban heat island sort of collaboration with Johns Hopkins, where we brought in students and had them design these little sensors. And then we actually went out and did door knocking with the students to ask people, can we put these sensors up in your community? Here's what it's going to do. It's going to measure temperature on the ground and then show if we were making these small changes with cool roofs and reusing vacant lots and all that stuff, will we see a change in temperature and potentially long-term looking at human health and integrating it with other plans and projects. But we asked them to help us with keeping an eye on the sensors, and then also help us in looking at the information that we took from the sensors, and then also to tell us about the projects they were doing in their neighborhood and things that they might think would impact those sensors. So if they were creating a new urban farm on a vacant lot, or they had done some retrofit to their house to lower energy costs. And we've found that that's been a great way to have continuous engagement. It's maybe not as solid in the metrics. I think there's definitely ways to enhance that. But it is this idea of these stories and the collecting of the stories and all that connectivity coming together around one project for us that's focused on urban heat islands, but for them is really about urban ag and trees and everything else that you're talking about. So I think it is a great idea.
Oh, no. Go.
I was just going to add on top of that, the theme of monitoring is something that comes up a lot in New York, and especially related to coastal edge design, and particularly around this area of coastal green infrastructure and natural nature-based features. There's numerous different entities that are now responsible for planning and implementing different types of, edge designs, whether it's a rebuild by design project, creating living breakwaters off of Staten Island, or a FEMA-funded hazard mitigation project that includes a hybrid of restoration and hazard mitigation and berm building. So there's all these really innovative kind of ideas that are happening right now, but they're all being funded by different sources and being implemented by different agencies. And so actually a grant that the Institute received is about trying to come up with a framework for thinking about metrics and understanding the performance of these types of investments across different water bodies, in different geographies, and how they can perform. Because right now, there's a lot of money actually going into these things and not a comprehensive way to look across them and compare them.
I actually wanted to say one other thing about engagement. Engagement tends apparently not to be a problem if you threaten to build a dam in a beautiful spot. And a sort of a loose corollary to some work we're doing, we're trying to get cities and tribes and irrigation districts to agree to additional reductions in their supplies. Very painful, costly, direct, to hedge against near-term hydrology, but also as mitigation. And so maybe it's social workers, therapists, maybe economists, about really how to make that sales job. We've intentionally actually characterized it as an insurance plan. This is protecting the higher priority users, taking pain earlier, and I have a new appreciation for the difficulty of being an insurance salesman. It is very difficult.
Sort of stepping back a couple of questions, observations, maybe channeling a little bit of Dan Sarowitz, but so I've had something that was bothering me a little bit about the charge, which is the $20 million anchoring point. Like, we don't even have the tools to assess whether or not that's even in the ballpark of a sufficient sort of number to tackle the challenge that we're doing. And just as an example, so the Global Change Research Program has about $6 million a year for its operating budget, just for like the coordination office stuff. And they don't really do any of the service work that we're talking about, right? So I worry about the anchoring that might be going on in this, but I mean, I appreciate it as a thought exercise. Then the point about that we're having about sort of what science does and whether it's social or natural science is that it's really just a form of social consensus, right? And so we can't look to it to take on the burden of giving an answer for choice, right? And so I worry that if we talk about saying, well, we need more social science to do this, that will fall into the same trap of sort of, well, we need better models to do this, right? We still don't have the processes in place in our society to sort of think about incorporating different types of information and creating the venues to have these conversations, because we don't have them, right? We turn to the expert, the PCAST body or this other expert body to say and speak with the authority of science to shortcut a political process, right? A lot of times, I think. And so I think the struggle with the process that all of you have been speaking to is the point and is actually really good. And I think that we turn to sort of the expertise of a model, which is by nature not something that can predict at our peril. So I think keeping that open as a discussion here is important.
Alas, we don't have enough time for all of our questions. We're going to take one more. Kevin, you're up. You haven't spoken yet. And then we're going to kind of summarize and give our panelists. For everyone who did not get to ask a question, can you write it in the bike lot so we can keep the theme and revisit it when we have a chance?
I appreciate that we've gone from a parking lot to a bike rack and now a bike lot too, so this is great. When are we going to get the protected bike lane? It's interesting. Each federal program, each whatever, there are a lot of limitations talked about at the beginning of this conversation. And a point that was brought up yesterday, they all have public laws undergirding them, right? And there's limitations within those programs. And the challenge, I think for me and for the local folks in the table is navigating those programs and their own limitations and figuring out how to apply them in your local context, right? And that's something that as a Fed who likes to think of themselves as a city's person, that I want to be responsive to. So I really appreciated this panel from that respect. And I would add in other levels of limitations to this conversation, because it's often, because we have so much money and are so visible, it's often, all right, what are the Fed programs? What are their limitations? How do you navigate them? But something that I'm increasingly interested in is how insurance is regulated, not NFIP, but not the flood insurance, but the rest of the insurance. It's all regulated at the state level, usually by appointed commissioners. And that's a community that I don't think has been engaged as much, but my understanding is really limiting the use of risk-based insurance premiums, right? Because the reality is that the market is not performing because, and really internalizing these risks in a way that they could be. And a big hurdle to that is the lack of insurance companies to do risk-based insurance premiums. Like my homeowner's insurance in Maryland, I can get a discount if I have a fire alarm that's connected to my local fire department, because that is written into a Maryland state insurance regulation, right? But I can't get an insurance reduction for redoing my roof and putting in an inch longer nails, right? So there's something weird about that. I just want to introduce that into this conversation.
Does anyone want to react?
I'm aware of one example which I think pivots on that. In North Las Vegas, there was an identified area of localized subsidence, and it was detected through INSAR data. And the thing that changed the development pattern was the insurance companies starting to get worried about the underwriting of those homes. This is, a huge area of growth. And that brought to the table the regulatory imposition. So it can kind of work both ways. It can be an implied threat that there is an unrecognized natural hazard that then becomes the regulatory hook.
So just closing out, there were lots of themes, but four that I kind of grabbed from across all of your presentations I just want to put out there. I heard there's this real hunger for actionable science and actual scientists, actual people that you can engage with. You have lots of data, there's a lot that already exists, but you need to be able to use it. I've heard that relationships and follow through or follow up are critical and often do not happen at your scale. I've heard we just have to be real about the fact that you operate in a political sphere. And so decisions cannot be isolated from that, nor can the science be isolated from that reality. And then the fourth thing was a real need for more advanced social science to help navigate this. I would say that's not the panacea for everything, but there is clearly a need that I heard you all say. So with that, I want to turn it back to you guys. Do you have any closing thoughts that you want to share or things you want to put forward for us to consider for the next 3 days?